Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panelists for coming today. I'd like to talk a little bit about this preemption issue because I know it's a concern for many of the members, and we've worked hard to try to address it. I said in my opening comments that the preemption provision in our bill should not have the unintended consequences outside the issues covered in the bill. So we don't believe that it affects the medical debt issue, which was raised a moment ago with respect to California. We'd certainly be willing to make that plain. Ms. Moy, you said, I thought I heard you say that we shouldn't have 50 different standards is not the answer. Is that what you said, or did I mishear your comments?
So what I have said is that I think that the best for consumers would be to create a floor, not a ceiling, so that states can continue to.
So set a national standard.
Right, and then allow states to protect additional categories of information, for example.
So my understanding is that 13 states now currently have data breach notification and standards like this, and that our legislation, our federal legislation, would be better than all of them except maybe one, which is Massachusetts. And I've been talking to some of my colleagues from Massachusetts. Would you agree with that?
I think that also Oregon has a pretty good standard, and I also think that there are elements of other state laws that you might not consider specific data security laws, but that do have elements.
So a pretty high standard.
It is a pretty high standard, yes.
So that's the starting point for us. How about there's been some discussion about the standard in energy and commerce. Would you say that that's a high standard, a higher standard than what our bill would propose, or?
So that standard is a reasonableness standard that looks more like what the Federal Trade Commission is currently doing, and so I think the difference here is not only might there be a difference in what the language says, and in that bill, I think also we would be looking to the common law of the Federal Trade Commission. And others to flesh out what the specific requirements are. But it's also really important as we're thinking about how strong the security standard is to think about who has the enforcement power and who's actually going to be guiding the parties there. Because if the federal agencies are solely responsible for it, then even a very strong standard might not provide as strong protection as a general reasonableness standard that allows state AGs to continue to work on a piecemeal basis with entities that are trying to comply.
Okay, so you think that the standard in our bill is a pretty good, pretty high standard in terms of a federal standard, but you believe that the states ought to have the flexibility to go beyond that, notwithstanding some of the issues that might create in terms of having different standards. How about this enforcement question? Have you looked at our bill in terms of the enforcement provisions in the bill, and how would you suggest that they be approved upon from your point of view?
So I can't. I have looked at it. Unfortunately, I'm not prepared to provide a detailed response on the enforcement provision. So I would be happy to in writing if you would prefer that. But I do think that the key issue with respect to enforcement is that I believe your bill would only facilitate enforcement by federal agencies. And as I said, I really think.
So you've said a number of times. I think what I heard you say is that allowing the state AGs some kind of role there would be an improvement. Again, not having looked at the details there, not to put words in your mouth.
Yes. I believe that a very critical element here is that we must have enforcement authority.
So I explore these issues just because, as I said in my opening statement, Mr. Neugebauer and I are willing to try to improve the bill so that we can get a greater consensus around it. We believe that, I think as you said, that a national standard is important to have, that 50 different standards is not kind of the way to go. It's got to be a high bar and one that's enforceable. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on the conversation that we've just had about preemption, about the standard and the enforceability of that standard?
Yeah, if I could, Congressman Carney, I think the bill on a bipartisan basis really takes on this issue in the right way, and that is to recognize that the act of legislating to unify 47 disparate state regimes with a federal regime that is not preemptive would merely be adding a 48th regime and wouldn't serve the purposes that the legislation seeks to undertake, which is to protect consumers' financial information. From ETA's perspective, the bill takes the right approach to ensure that that federal regime is operative and is not interfered with.
And everybody agrees that we need a higher standard and kind of one standard across the country?
We fully agree that there should be a national standard. We think that the states deserve a tremendous amount of credit for having acted in a place where the federal government has not yet, and that's why we believe that, as a broad concept, preemption strong law should offer state preemption, and as a broad concept, state AGs should have the ability to play a role in the enforcement of it.
See, I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.